So both of you, welcome. I'm very pleased you're able to join me. To kick off, I suppose, we're going to talk a little bit about robotic process automation and the decisioning landscape. You guys are both intimately involved in that. What are you seeing as the next frontier in terms of development in this sort of area? It's been around for a while, right?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Chris. So I think to understand RPA better, maybe we walk back or a couple of steps before what came before RPA. And the main starting point of all process automation was the workflow automation technology back in the early 90s. And then
Mm,
BPM came along. So the workflow automation focus was to automate business logic for the business. And BPM came along and said, okay, let's make this systematic. Let's have a design, implementation, monitoring, measurement, and continuous improvement cycle. And that added basically to a heavy stack of implementation, starting from design up to measurement, and left areas where for lightweight tasks or specific tasks that needed to be automated, it was more about copying data from one place to another or doing a series of click that a human basically would do repetitively every day. And those are mundane type of things. And that's where RPA was born. And it was touted as our lightweight solution, had a lot of success in automating those type of repetitive lightweight solution. And over time, integrated more and more of other capabilities, all workflow automation into the mix. And now we are in this. So what we saw also after RPA and some of the other in the process automation space was, so more and more APIs and REST APIs or web services started to be developed, and everybody or every software vendor had their API apps there. Now the question became, how do we uh, integrate or create process automation over these internet services that are outside the boundaries of our company? And that's where what I call a generation of also API orchestration tools, such as Napier of the world and others were born to fill the gap between, from if we start from workflow automation, BPM, RPA, which was more about a repetitive type of simple lightweight automation, and API orchestration. So those are the generations of technology that we have seen. And in my mind, as we are going more toward revolutionizing how we offer software and how we actually integrate now AI into our software stack, we will see a new generation of process automation that will use and benefit more from AI
mm.
and will explore and extend frontiers that have not been available to us before in terms of automation landscape.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it feels like it's like this evolution that's kind of happened over time from sort of like all the way back into like, and as the processing powers improved, as the sophistication improved, we could just do more things with the same thing. I suppose that whole decisioning piece and some of the AI stuff that's sort of bringing. I mean, is that sort of like the next level of advancement, do you think, in terms of some of this automation and making it more sophisticated and making it be able to do more difficult things and make, more decisions to a certain extent?
I think we're striking a balance. And I think a lot of these things are not so much development as cascading, where you have a new technology which is simple, easy to implement, and fast. And then over 5 to 10 years, it grows about 1 million features and about 1,000 different certifications that you need and becomes something too heavy for adopters to take on. And then you have a
Mm,
new technology and it's timed with a couple of features, but a lot of them may not be ready for prime time.
mm,
And a lot of them might be appetite driven. My best example would still be in banking, know your client. Those laws are vague. They're deliberately vague, and every bank has to decide for themselves what it means to know their client
mm.
and, and get legal opinions. So you can't really automate the process completely at all. And if you do, you need to be able to insert your own opinion. So I think the next evolution, people are expecting it to be a system that's entirely automated, but it's technically impossible because the laws are vague, the implementations are vague, and you run by your own risk appetite and opinion.
Mm.
And that's where I think basically defining your process and adding your opinion to it puts you at the upper edge of what is actually possible rather than what is fashionable.
So it's really where you sort of have this, historically, it's been almost like quite a linear process, albeit with some complexity that's sort of going, that could be put in with it. But once you get into these more sort of complex kind of, well, often human-based decision type processes, that's the point where, well, do we need to call out to additional technology or whatever it is to actually make some of those decisions, but then automate some of that, which can then improve efficiency, I'd imagine. Is that kind of what you're seeing?
So Adi brought up a very good point. And if I want to put it from the perspective of what I mentioned, all of the technologies that we talked about, workflow automation, BPM and RPA, and also even right now, API orchestration, what they have in common is they have scripted logic in advance. You define the automation. And specifically in case of RPA, if there is a very slight, basically, changes to the situation, to the input, to where things have been on the screen before that you used to click, that automation will break. And the real world is not like that. The real world is more complex. Things are changing underneath, the inputs are changing. And on the other hand, they are not changing materially, but they're to the extent that some of those changes or some of those context, if you will, they need human in the loop to be able to kind of go from one step A to step B. What these technologies have basically either by being scripted, going off and bringing too much of human in the loop so that they defy the promise of automation, or they do not allow that this context and their decision to happen, which basically required to make those automation effective. And that's the main issue that I see with the current technologies, and where AI is going to help us a lot by reducing the type of use cases that we automation is not effective. We go back to humans, so the human is overwhelmed, or we need to put context-aware reasoning and decision-making and learning from data so that we reduce the number of cases that we don't actually need to go back to human for any small changes or any cases that is possible to make a decision and move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I remember some of that in the old days of green screen scraping, which is when we were even allowed to do that. You're not even allowed to do that now. It's just like, someone would change something, there'd be an extra comma in something, or it changed by one position over and the whole thing would basically crash, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned AI there. I mean, there's been a lot of talk around AI, and I suppose particularly like large language models and those kind of things. I mean, how do you sort of see that fitting into some of the workflow automation? I mean, it's sort of like everyone gets excited about these things, but should we be really looking at that spot, or do you think there's more money being left on the table in terms of extra process automation as well? What do you kind of think? And then I want to ask Adi a little bit about the intelligence piece around it. But
Sure. So over the last couple of years, there has been a seismic shift in terms of AI and the democratization of AI used based on LLMs and ChatGPT, basically bringing it to the household and bringing it to the mainstream and businesses. And it's mainly due to the fact that now we can work, or we can have language models or AI entities that can operate on unstructured data and unlock a huge amount of unstructured data that was untappable, was very expensive and very hard to access. And on the other hand, have that human level dialogue. Basically, why we had programming language, because we couldn't communicate to the machine what to do exactly. So we had to have that language. Now we have this privilege of talking to the machine in human language, using text, voice, video, and those type of multimodal inputs to be understood by the machine. Where I think, or there's a gap in the common understanding of how AI is going to affect not everyday consumer use cases, but the business use cases, is how that technology, LLM technology, will need to be translated into something that a business can use beyond simple generative cases, beyond generating another blog, but rather actually automating some process or doing some actual work done. And so there has been a lot of work around trying to bring intelligence or some of the machine learning capabilities into the previous generation of process automation by bringing intelligent document platform or intelligent document processing into RPA or into workflow automation or into the API level orchestration. But with the new wave of LLMs, they have enabled a new type of software to be built. And that's through creation of AI agents. And that's the layer that can be built on top of not only LLMs, but these are on top of existing tools like legacy systems, human input, and other models, other AI models for that matter, that LLMs are not good at solving such problems. And so all of those can be encapsulated into AI agents. And in my view, those are catalysts for creating or realizing some of the vision around hyper automation that over the last few years, Gartner or others have been talking about.
But as excited we get around, I suppose, using LLMs at home, and we can sort of see some of those things, it seems like in the short term, there's almost like an immediate use case, which is like, how do you then take that unstructured data, create structured data, then feed it into some of the workflow systems, or even add into some of the decisioning stuff as well? I mean, do you think I know it's quite narrow use of it, but is that a nice place for places to start, or do you still think that's too much risk?
So no, not really. I mean, except that you don't really need the latest LLMs for that. We're doing just fine extracting categories and things from data. So even today, an LLM probably won't be your best go-to for the kind of use cases that people envisage. So everybody says, oh, you know what? I'm getting this contract. I need to extract 5 or 6 terms from it in structured data. We have to use an LLM. It's the latest thing, but probably at the final analysis, your implementation people won't end up using an LLM. LLMs are very specific technology and it's very, very user friendly. But unfortunately, human language has ambiguity galore. So there was a reason we used to use these extremely terse programming languages and still do, which is that the minute you use natural language, you can create a lot of ambiguity, and a computer, bless it, is a thing that will misunderstand anything that it can. If it can go wrong in computers, it will, and it will do it at the worst possible time. So I think you're looking at a balance. You need a certain amount of rigidity in the business. You need a certain amount of structure. If you rely only on your data only comes from your past. So you need to find some sort of a balance between structure, the machine doing what you want it to do, and intelligence. We want it to be smart, but not so smart that it doesn't understand what we want it to do. And I think LLMs at the moment are a little bit out of control. We haven't quite gotten the rigidity we need for business implementation there. They call it hallucinating, which is a very polite word for what they do. You really can't walk into a court of law and cite 3 cases that don't exist. It doesn't go down well with a judge, you know what I mean? And they will invent data where it's missing, making them quite dangerous.
I mean, one of the things I definitely notice is when you're typing in a prompt, as an example, and the way you actually word the prompt can make quite a big difference in terms of the response you get. And so it's not necessarily consistent. I mean, it might broadly be the same, but it's not necessarily consistent. That makes a big difference, right, in terms of the way it comes out. And you want to have it repeatable. I imagine, particularly if you're running a standard process, and you want to make sure that actually comes out in a consistent kind of way. In fact, it's taught me a lot about how to actually ask questions in many ways, because you have to get the prompt pretty accurate to actually get the answer you actually want.
Or if you're building a brand, branding is all about consistency, as is compliance. So anytime you want to create a fixed response in a brand, why would you buy a brand instead of a non-brand? Because it promises you a fixed level of satisfaction. Now, not everybody wants to be trained exactly how to ask your call center, or certainly how to ask your process automation. You know, your legal team are not going to word your contracts for your process automation, and it's not going to be able to learn them and change the way it speaks to your clients. Prof?
Absolutely. I mean, for the same reason AI is not equal LLM, right? And so LLM has its own nice use cases, meaning that when it has helped a lot with generative cases where basically, somebody wants to generate a piece of content, a response or a blog or, for that matter, marketing or few others have been seeing a lot of benefit from it. Even there, to your point, if you're generating your marketing material, you want your brand voice, your basically style be preserved. And that's why on top of LLMs, we have other purpose-built applications that they make sure they put guardrails, system before and system after to ensure what you generated is actually differentiated for you, for your brand, and for your company. Similarly, the other, the process automation side. So in the context of an enterprise, we deal with a lot of unstructured data, and that comes in terms of documents, PDFs, invoices, purchase orders, basically procurement or standard documentation, or a lot of other documentation that are exchanged between companies. And so for those type of applications, building basically intelligent document understanding or processing engines is basically the prominent way to understand those. Although LLMs are not in the meaning of, chat GPT, but the foundational deep neural networks has been a catalyst for us to even understand these documents better and build better systems. All in all, what I'm saying, beyond the LLMs, if LLMs certainly could be a piece of the puzzle for process automation, where we need to integrate or interact with a human, understand their input and put them back, and where we are responding back to them. And inside an AI agent, and going back to the notion of agent that we mentioned, it has its flexibility and architecture that gives us this architectural benefit that we can use LLMs when we need to. We can tap into traditional machine learning. We can tap into other existing systems and put an orchestration layer on top of all of them to automate all processes more intelligently.
So it sort of gets used as part of this almost like blended approach where you're using the right tool at the right time for the right job. So those sort of things rather than, I mean, I think if you read the media, it kind of feels like this thing is a wonder kid that can do everything, when in fact it's actually one part of the bigger puzzle. And I suppose one of the questions I wanted to ask is, we kind of see that and we get caught up in these extensive discussions around this is going to solve everything, right? But where's the value in terms of the value for businesses and looking at some of this automation? I mean, there's a lot of focus on this sort of like, general sort of like AI or using LLMs as AI, but is that where the value is, or is there actually a huge amount of value in almost like these, maybe a little bit less sexy, I suppose, sort of back end processes, but there's huge kind of opportunity there. I mean, what do you guys kind of see? And
My leap in.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to eventually have to climb up the news and the hype cycle and start to separate what's going to create value and what's not.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people know how to run their own business really well. The myth that somebody's going to roll in with something that you just install and everything will improve. Most of the time, what ends up happening is that the people who are rolling in with that thing are also rolling in with 20 PhDs that you have to pay for, and they're tweaking your business for all eternity through this little thing. So if you can create systems, which A, you can run by yourself, B, don't create more cost in overhead and in manpower to run it and in processing power, then you're going to get a return on your investment. At the moment, probably the largest gains are in process automation and process improvement. What makes UpBrains so fantastic is that its user interface is so configurable. So processes change, you realize there's a situation you haven't planned for. You want to be able to add it in without redoing all the work, without needing to pull in a vast army of engineers, et cetera, et cetera. So any strategy that you implement, you have to look at what kind of resources it's going to take to implement it. The data centers in the world now are using more power than the United Kingdom. My word.
Absolutely. And to complement that, so LLMs or large language models or large neural network for that matter may not be a good basically solution to every problem. It's like, taking or keeping a very huge hammer to on a small nail. So that's where the value of more purpose built, smaller model comes in, then they have more context awareness because they have been trained on the data, specific task or data, or they have been designed for that purpose. They can be used along with other agents. And for that matter, it's include basically one of the values or value props of TrueBot in particular, when we looked at it, is that flexible decision making and context aware decision making for your business. Again, you can define it using a very business centric language as opposed to IT and put it in production, see basically in real world how is it operating or continuously improve it based with new data. And for such use cases that you need to make a decision, for example, whether I'm going to approve patient voice or not, these type of decisions may not be made very well with an LLM, but with machine learning models such as those that you can build with Sue, you can. And there are multiple other, basically many other use cases in a process automation scenario where we can think of these individual models to be used along with LLMs and along with other APIs to create that ultimate process automation.
Yeah, and I suppose you got the piece there. So it's transparency around decisioning, transparency around the process, those kind of things, which sort of links everything together. I mean, and you talked there a little bit about these AI agents. I mean, do you think that's where it goes next? So if you're sort of like saying, well, let's take a step back. Let's not use one of these large LLMs, automate everything, because it's not going to happen. What you've got to have is focus on what the process is. You can automate the process. You can do that using advanced workflow technology and advanced decisioning kind of technology. And that's probably a great place to start. And that's probably where the money is in terms of like savings or process improvement, those kind of things. And then it sounds like these AI agents are probably the next things for us to start thinking about. So rather than going down this, like using large models, use smaller models to maybe that are specifically trained on certain use cases. I mean, is that sort of where you see it sort of going? Because there seems to be a big debate at the moment in terms of these AI agents. Do I build another model that's even bigger than it was before and using nuclear reactors and using, data centers the size of small countries, or do I develop sort of smaller kind of models and maybe start to link them together? Do I kind of get that right?
Can I chime in? Because Prof has a much more illustrious career than me. We don't want to create more enemies for him, but I have plenty. Look, large, completely non-transparent models. There's a thing in psychology called the backfire effect, where we commit to a strategy, and when it fails, the only thing we conclude is we need to recommit and do more of it, instead of ever questioning it. Now, the models are getting bigger and bigger. Every time you double their size, you maybe get 0.25% improvement each time. They're not getting anywhere near the level where we could use them in the way that they're being advertised. Anybody who's had to speak to a chatbot will tell you, in a lot of organizations, it can get quite difficult. Very few people are using the AIs on their phones. And these are state of the art. I mean, nobody's skimping on them. But they're not there, and there's no evidence that they're going to get there because they are never being told what the context is and what your appetite is. So I think we need to understand you can use AI to read a document and get structured data out of it at a usable level of precision. Then you would want to add some sort of decisioning that you can control and change and is transparent. Naturally, I recommend ours. After that, you have to do your processing. So I think you need to ask yourself some very simple questions. Can I use this without ever understanding why it was done this way? If the answer is no, you cannot be putting these things in. Is this something that needs to be flexible on a regular basis? Is it subject to changes in laws and changes in the market? If it is, you can't be using these heavy AI technologies. Now, invoices, you will never put in an invoice that has a 0 on it and want it to be scanned as a 7. It's an entirely consistent case, which is why these new technologies are so good at it. Anything which is absolutely consistent, AI is great at. Anything which requires flexibility or transparency, these things are not acceptable. And a lot of projects are failing, not just because they don't produce results, but because they then don't pass governance tests.
But what you're kind of saying is you don't want to have flexibility necessarily within the model or within the technology, build it into the platform so you can actually adjust the process quickly. So then there's the transparency or the explainability is still there. But build the flexibility into the platform, the human control piece, rather than just assuming the system's going to manage that.
I think the upper level of performance is when you combine a control flow program like UpBrains, where it has not only its own capacities, but very easy hooks to external capacity to do what AI does best. They've cherry picked the best providers, but you can add your own. There's no issues. And then once you have extracted and understood technologically electronically what you have on your hands, you need to be able to encapsulate your own decision in a transparent way. So I think at the moment, that's probably the upper edge of performance. See how these technologies are going to ever beat that going forward. Maybe Prof is more involved in research and knows where they're headed.
Sure. Yeah,
But I don't get much further than this.
No, that's a great perspective. And I think, in my view, when we look at the spectrum of use cases, there are certainly different problems that we would solve differently. We will not use, for example, an LLM or just this particular way of doing that because different problems require different solutions. And I agree with you that, there are those use cases where we would benefit specifically because of transparency, requirement, explainability, governance, or other aspects. We may not be ready to use LLMs in those specific scenarios, and we would benefit from the technology stacks that you mentioned. Having said that, I think from a more futuristic point of view, or the way that we are seeing the technology evolving, my view is that the future of software is agentic, or we will see that the API level will be replaced by agents. So, not in so distant futures, not for every use case, but we will see a lot of businesses, they will have AI agents. And those their APIs were there for other programmers to integrate with them, but their agents are there for end users to contact them. Maybe, today we see some failed experience of chatbots where they are successful only in scripted type of scenarios. But tomorrow we will see those type of scenarios will be expanding so that they are checking your status of an order, status of a case to, the day after they would be accepting information for a new case. And, that might involve filling a form or interactively providing that information more in natural language. So every business basically will have their own software exposed. And now imagine a world that we have millions of agents out there. Now, how do we govern this world? And we are writing, actually, we were publishing a blog, which I believe it's due to be published today, where we classify the different classes of agents that we see, starting from conversational or QA agents, where their focus is question answering, help you in customer service type of scenario. Moving up to expert agents, where now these agents, you will be able to also plug in other AI models or other tools to do more than only question answering. And then move up to another level with what we call automation agents, where they would automate a workflow. And that's the type of automation that, UpBrains provide and Adi talked about, where, we have this flexible or intelligent environment where you can plug in other AI models and other APIs and other systems to automate the flow. And the future to, in my view would be, we would be moving toward more autonomous agents where we will be basically having less and less of scenarios where we need to go back to human. However, for those type of scenarios that technologies like RPA or others fail because of small changes here and there, or agents are capable of processing unstructured data or tolerating some of the changes, and on the other hand, enabling more powerful decision making. That being said, that future will not be without human. It will constitute a more natural human collaboration and human in the AI loop, so that those cases that really require more reasoning, more basically approval, or cases that are not routine, they still would be done by AI, or the whole process may be guided by a human. So those are, depending on the use cases, we would see a spectrum of that maybe, in a few years time horizon.
What I
That's
find
my
fascinating
personal.
with the language that's used in terms of when we talk about these things is we talk about, in terms of the way we as humans, we interact with the world, the information goes into our brain and we sort of like construct the reality around us. We talk about the hallucinations, but in some ways, it's almost like as human beings, we can make mistakes as well. But even when you're just talking about agentic AI, you're talking about, we're going to almost like train different models for different levels within an organization, just like you would almost like train different people with different courses, depending on what specialism they actually want to have. So you might have people who are going to be production people. You might have people who are going to be manager people. You might have people who are going to be expert SME kind of people. And there's this sort of like parallel track that's running between, at least as an analogy, between what we do as individuals in our society and what we're doing with the machines to a certain extent, even though they are machines. And it's kind of interesting how it sort of like gradually seems to be moving that kind of way in some ways. And maybe it's natural because even with humans, I mean, we can only have so much in our brain. We can't remember everything in the whole of the world and the whole of history, like we're trying to change with these AGIs. We can't all be polymaths that used to be.
I think it's really great to be able to define a process and have a machine execute it.
Mm.
And I think the more AI there is, the more flexibility there will be. I mean, you were talking earlier, Chris, about the rigidity that used to be there in scraping and in understanding. So that rigidity is reducing. And that's a good thing. I no longer have to type in specific fields. I can send in the invoice and it will extract in a very non-rigid way, in a very flexible way. The next sort of step that's being punted is that there will now be fluidity in the actual flow itself.
Mm.
And I'm not too keen to have a system that will define the actual data flows with less rigidity. We could end up in big trouble.
Well, if you look at my analogy, what actually works is mass production, factories, those kind of things, because you get the same product every time versus handmade every single time where you get a lot of variation.
So, I mean, if I could extend your analogy, I would love to have a machine that I'm making widgets. It looks like something that complies with the law, that won't get me into trouble with a regulator, and that my board feels is within my remit. Now, I'm really glad that we could take one. We used to only need one piece of metal that would make it. We had a little fixed robot. And now we've got all sorts of things that are being thrown in. Plastics, whatever you want to throw in, it makes the same widget. Because the only person who knows what widget I want is me. And so what you want to increase flexibility in the possible inputs. You want to increase its talent at reading what it's given and extracting correct categories. But when it comes to creating process flow, I disagree with Prof respectfully. I think you're getting into, I'm used to very highly regulated environments, and people think sort of banking, finance are very highly regulated. Some of those regulations are very vague, deliberately so, because they put the onus on the enterprise to make sure that on any interpretation, they're still in the clear.
No, I think in the sense that we in business need framework, policies, constraints, and an overall workflow that we understand how that workflow needs to be done. And that's, even if the design of that is AI assisted, that has to be verified and looked at, make sure that it complies with rules and policies and every company's internal processes before put in production. But on the other hand, if we were to look at how process orchestration is done today, this is so rigid today. So if we are executing a process and if it fails in the middle of the execution and it required human attention, we look at it and we see, oh, okay, this particular input came in, it didn't have this particular field and it just failed because we haven't designed for that. Now we have to go back and update. And or this particular thing came in, it required also some other thing that we can give a tool to AI to actually, for example, we need to get the status of an order. We need an order ID. However, we have the customer email and we haven't designed for that. So an AI agent can get the email, basically go and find the corresponding order with that additional detail there. So there are a few things that will be assisting and recovering from failure. That's from the current process automation. That's the welcome type of interjection of AI and intelligence into that. And then when we go to a higher level, where we basically also assisting human in, typical example that we used to give in, let's say, service orchestration was travel scenarios. So if you want to have, multiple agents, you're going back to what you mentioned, Chris, that, we see the future where each of these agents will be specialized in one thing. We will have the booking agents and car rental agents and, maybe flight booking and different type of agents that are working on their own domain of expertise and their own tool. And so if we want to travel somewhere, we know the overall process. We are going to identify that these are the required components that I need. These are the specific constraints that I want to have in place. This is my budget and stuff. Now we'll go and figure out the actual execution of how many other providers will be contacted, how this will be put together. And that's something that we can actually potentially give it to an AI agent to do it for us.
Yeah. I mean, we're almost at time. And I just wanted to ask, just in terms of we've talked quite a lot around AI, but I think I just want to come back to just like the volume of work that there is around just trying to automate our existing processes. So again, we get excited about this stuff and it's great. And I love it as much as everyone. But I mean, how much opportunity do you think there is just in automating processes in terms of making them more robust and making them more automated? And so being able to do them for a reduced cost. I mean, have we even scratched the surface in terms of what's the possibility of being able to be done? Adi, what's your view really?
Let me give a little historical analogy. The first computer was not programmable. You built the entire circuit and it ran what you built. Then they thought up a machine that you didn't have to rebuild every time. You could type little punch cards and it would do it for you. And the same thing is happening now. If you look at an onboarding process, and I think we've got to remember something. It's going to be horses for courses. Optimizing a car rental and a travel itinerary for a person is an entirely different thing to onboarding a new mining concern at a bank in a country that's full of fraud. It's chalk and cheese. And I think for the lion's share of businesses at the moment, the lion's share of savings are going to be in automating complex processes. And complex processes that up to now, because we didn't have the technologies we had 5 years ago, have required tons of humans and throwing many a body at it. So it used to be that if you applied for venture capital, you got a person, he had 15 spreadsheets that he knew how to fill in, and that was his job, chasing, did you get that document? It becomes a yes, et cetera, et cetera. Then the spreadsheet had a mistake in it. Yeah. Those are where the real benefits are going to come.
Yeah.
But even then, you're going to have to come into the process and you're going to have to understand, you're not just going to throw all your spreadsheets into a thing and it will understand. That doesn't exist.
Yeah.
What exists is some really good software that is graphic user interface, that is easy to understand. You can define your process and it will execute it.
And I suppose part of that is also around getting your processes right as well, thinking through what your process should be and getting that right, which then helps with the automation piece. I mean, Hamid, what's your sort of comment? I mean, what do you sort of see in terms of like the opportunity that there is there?
I think we have a tremendous opportunity in front of us because of two reasons. One, a lot of manual work that is done manually on unstructured data, like the example that Ali gave. We're working with spreadsheets, with PDFs and others. So we have a lot of that in the enterprise, and we have some processes and the opportunities for automating those. That's the low hanging fruit. We have the technology for it, and we have basically an opportunity from a business point of view in front of us to tap into and automate basically more of mundane human work, both internally and for our customers. And then there is another big bucket of automation opportunities, automation that will be unlocked as we tap into more of unstructured data for the enterprise, which, to some extent, there are 70% of our business data is unstructured, right? So as we dig more and more, and as the technology matures, more more of that data become available to us to be used in the automation opportunities. And that's where we have to be thinking about and planning. And to your point, we cannot just take our old processes, the way that we used to do it, just automate them as they are. Have to think about now, in the new world, how they would be, how to plan those automation opportunities and projects, and what's the impact on our workforce, how to prepare them, what's the impact on policy, what's the impact on business, and what's the expectation of our customers, and put all of that and come up with basically an process automation strategy for the enterprise. And we start simple and start with the art of possible.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a fascinating topic, and I thank you both for joining me. The takeaways from me have been, how do you start to automate it, making sure you got flexibility in terms of some of the process design, and then it's really a blend of different techniques that you can use going forward. So, so Hamid and Adi, thanks very much for joining me. Really appreciate it, and really super interesting. So thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Chris.